Video games are a staple of our world culture and they have a rich history spanning over 60 plus years, but let me ask you this. Do you know the first home video game console? Or what the first video games were? More than likely, people do not actually know who the true pioneers of the video game industry were, and I think that shouldn't be some alternative history someone has to go investigate to learn about. So here's my pitch to change that. This is the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas. Within these walls, there are many games, consoles, and histories. With the support of Frisco and a Kickstarter, the National Video Game Museum was founded in 2016. The museum's goal is to preserve video game history via information, physical pieces of history, and stories of the creators. The museum goes about preserving and sharing this history with exhibits they call stages. There are about 17 stages people can walk through and even interact with. The stages are meant to summarize and reflect video game history. While they do this nicely, I would want them to add one more stage to help show an important part of video game history that has seemingly been swept to the side. I would want to introduce a Stage 0. This stage would be focusing on the initial first people who helped develop video games. But before we dive deeper into this, let's explain and look at the current set of stages at the National Video Game Museum. I went with my partner to investigate and map out an area for where I could fit my hypothetical Stage 0. As we entered, even before we bought tickets, we were greeted by a giant display showing clips of games and golden consoles. It was very notable and very cool. After buying tickets, you're immediately thrown into the first stage, which covers classic video game consoles and arcades. It does have two of the consoles I would want to highlight in my idea for a stage, the Magnavox Odyssey and its prototype, the Brown Box. I was happy to see the Brown Box get its own display case, as well as seeing that it was signed by Ralph Baer himself. I would have this display set up differently, but let's come back to that later. The second stage is a timeline room, where you see a giant SNES controller, and you use it to navigate and look at history of consoles that they have. The third stage takes a look at third-party game developers, like Konami, Capcom, or Square Enix, breaking down their roles they play in the industry and how they came to be. They also had an Xbox with Sonic Generations on it, and I might have been there for a minute. In between 3 and 4, there was a small section talking about Easter eggs. We actually managed to find the Easter egg for this Atari game. The fourth stage had a collection of controllers like the Nintendo Power Glove and other notable controllers they had collected over time. The fifth stage is a portable stage. The items you would find in here are all about being on the go with gaming. There's items like the PS Portable, the DS, the Game Boy, or even some weird little portable Pac-Man games they had back in the day. Stage 6 is focused on the crash of Atari, with a recreation of a store display showing how many stores at the era were trying to just sell off games and get rid of their surplus of Atari. Stage 7 is called Rise. It focuses on the rise of home computers and also the companies that rose up making games for these computers. Stage 8 is called Create. This is where you go and design a character with a background. There's also some people playing Doom here too. Stage 9 through 11 are rotating exhibits, but currently they are a Native American representation exhibit, a virtual reality gaming exhibit, and a Pokemon exhibit. Also, the Pokemon exhibit had a really cool Mewtwo board. Stage 12 is called Unplugged. It focuses on video games that have been turned into board games. You can see a Pac-Man board game, a Zelda one, and funny enough, a Doom one. Following Stage 12 is a checkpoint, which is a hot pot of items the museum has collected with no particular location for them. Stage 13 is called Family. It's a recreation of a 70s looking living room with an inner television gaming station set up on the living room coffee table connected to the TV. The next stage seems very nostalgia inspired and it's called Sanctuary. It's the recreation of a room from the 80s. It looks like it's very clearly meant to be a boys' room, judging by the posters and the coloring of the wall. There's also an NES here with Duck Hunt on it. Stage 15, Respect, pays tribute to an individual like the creator of the inner television. Stage 16 is known as bonus and has some cool statues. The room leads to a bunch of arcades that you can play with coins you received from the tour. It is also connected to stage 17, which is the aforementioned arcade. This final stage then concludes the tour and leads to a gift shop. This museum's great. I love the idea of having stages to highlight the industry history leveling up over time. I enjoyed playing at the arcade. I played Sonic like 2 times here. Seeing a lot of the consoles and games I'd been studying this past semester felt rewarding, but I wish they would have had a stage for another aspect of video game history that I felt like was super important to highlight. The first video games and consoles. Imagine, before stage 1, in that area before you get your tickets, you enter a prelude with a stage 0, titled Press Start. Within this room, there are 4 items now joining this giant display of golden consoles. The first item is a display or recreation of the game Tennis for Two, with a museum label discussing its creator and its impact on the gaming industry. It would say something like this. Tennis for Two was developed in Brookhaven National Laboratory in 1958 by William Higginbotham, a scientist who worked on the first nuclear bomb. It was incredibly popular at the Brookhaven National Laboratory when the lab hosted a public exhibition. The game was displayed on a oscilloscope, with 2 lines representing the tennis court and net. A ball would travel across the screen and be hit by a player to the other side till one fails to return the ball. It was one of the, if not the, first video game ever created. For this, I believe it's super important for it to be recognized by the museum and displayed in Stage 0. Another game I would want to recognize in this display is Space Wars, a game made in 1962 by Stephen Slug Russell and others at MIT. This game focuses on 2 spaceships fighting each other while being pulled into a gravity well. This great space battle would take place on a DEC PDP mini computer that the team had programmed. I believe that I would want a recreation of this computer with Space Wars on the display with a label to go with it as well. The importance of this game cannot go understated. Its code became public domain, giving people a model to use for reference, inspiring many games that we still recognize to this day, like Asteroids or Computer Space, the first ever arcade game. Space War and its code helped the industry begin. The final items I want to bring to the spotlight are the first ever video game consoles. The brown box, or what became of it, the Magnavox Odyssey. These consoles were designed by Ralph Baer and other co-workers with the idea to bring video games to home using consoles for TVs. Games on these consoles included checkers, some sports games, a golfing putt-putt game, a target shooting game, and a ping pong game that Atari would then, how do I put it nicely, got a little too inspired by, and would then create the mega hit Pong. Baer would sue Atari over this and win, but Pong was still such a huge hit that Atari had a firm foothold in all of pop culture and became a successful gaming company for many years until their crash, as seen in the museum. Getting back on topic, you can see the reason for adding these pieces to Stage 0 would be extremely necessary because of their importance as the first ever video game consoles that then would also inspire many upon many games to follow it. For someone who hasn't had the opportunity to study video game history, this might have been your first time ever realizing the importance of these games, programs, or consoles. And a big reason why it seems like the common populace doesn't know about them is because they were either made without the intent of making a profit, like Tennis for Two and Space War, or they undersold and were forgotten about, like the Magnavox Odyssey. Instead, we see most people look up to the ones that made a profit and call that capital H history. In the museum, we see a lot of tributes aimed at Nintendo and Atari, like Stage 1, title image being a classic Pong screen, or the giant SNES controllers. Even a segment dedicated to the Atari crash. While these companies are a huge part of video game history, I think it's super important to appreciate and pay tribute to not only the true pioneers of the industry, but pioneers who are located in the USA, a perfect fit for the National Video Game Museum. In conclusion, considering how Stage 0 is before the tickets, it helps ensure that people who don't even end up going to the museum will learn about the pioneers of this industry. I also think that it works with the room's display very well, and I would enjoy lines connecting to the center statue indicating how the 4 are connected to all games. Also, a lot of field trips come through the museum, and having the younger generations learn about gaming history would help them appreciate their current generation of games and consoles. For all these reasons and more, it proves why Stage 0 would be a great addition to the National Video Game Museum at Frisco.
That lets you do your own thing on television, and only from Magnavox.